Commander Li Gu felt his heart pounding as he stared at the massive holographic screen. The Strategic Command Center buzzed with activity, but everything seemed to slow down as the horrific scene unfolded before his eyes. 50,000 beings from across the galaxy knelt in perfect rows on the gleaming crystal platform of Nexus Prime, the most powerful world in the galaxy. The morning had started like any other. Jiwoo was reviewing supply reports when his assistant burst into the room. "Sir, you need to see this. Emergency broadcast from the Galactic Council." Now, 3 hours later, he wished he had never turned on that screen. Counselor Thexmar stood at the center of the platform, his scaled green skin reflecting the harsh lights. His species, the Drakmori, had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years. With his long claws and glowing yellow eyes, he looked like something out of humanity's worst nightmares. "Citizens of the galaxy," Thexmar's voice boomed across every world, every space station, every ship in known space. "Today marks a new chapter in galactic history. These 50,000 criminals have been found guilty of the most serious crime possible, turning good citizens against their rightful leaders." Jiwoo's hands shook as he zoomed in on the faces of the condemned. Men, women, and children from dozens of different species. Some looked terrified. Others stood proud and defiant. All of them about to die. Captain Park Minji watched from her position aboard the human embassy ship, floating in orbit around Nexus Prime. She had been at a diplomatic dinner just hours ago, laughing with alien ambassadors about trade agreements. Now she stood frozen, unable to believe what she was seeing. No, she whispered, pressing her face against the viewing port. Her enhanced binoculars picked out familiar faces in the crowd below. There was Teacher Kim from the New Busan colony, who had taught alien children alongside human ones. There was Dr. Martinez from Terra Nova, who had built the first interspecies hospital in the Outer Rim. "Ma'am," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving panicked transmissions from human colonies across the galaxy. They're saying, some of their people are down there." Minji's blood ran cold. These weren't criminals or terrorists. These were teachers, doctors, engineers, and farmers. Their only crime had been asking questions when the council started taking more and more resources from the frontier worlds back on the platform. Dexmar continued his speech. "For too long, we have been soft. We have allowed dangerous ideas to spread like a virus through our peaceful galaxy. Some species," his eyes seemed to look directly through the camera, "have forgotten their place in the natural order." The condemned prisoners sat in absolute silence. No crying, no begging for mercy. They knew this was a show, a message being broadcast to trillions of beings across thousands of worlds. In the human embassy's main hall, Ambassador Kim Doyon stood surrounded by his staff. The elegant room, with its earth paintings and Korean traditional furniture, felt like a mockery now. How could they have been discussing trade deals and cultural exchanges while this was being planned? "Sir," his aide whispered, "should we contact?" "Earth Command." Doyen raised his hand for silence. On the screen, Dexmar was raising his clawed hand into the air. Behind him, 1,000 council soldiers stood at attention, their energy weapons aimed at the kneeling prisoners. "Let this be a lesson," Dexmar declared. "Question the council's wisdom and face the consequences. Spread dangerous ideas about equality and freedom and join these criminals in death." The energy weapons began to glow with deadly light. "It off," Doyon whispered, but his staff stood frozen. "Turn it off now." But the broadcast continued. Across the galaxy, on every planet, every ship, every space station, trillions of beings watched as the weapons fired. The beams struck simultaneously. 50,000 lives ended in a single brilliant flash of light. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Yuhana's fingers flew over her scanner. Controls back on Earth. As the galaxy's leading expert on alien biology, she had been called in to analyze the footage. What she found made her sick to her stomach. "Commander," she called to Jiwoo, her voice shaking. "I've identified at least 300 humans in the crowd. It's colonists from New Busan, Terra Nova, and the Kepler settlements. But, sir, it's worse than that." Jiwoo turned to face her, dreading what he was about to hear. "Many of them were children, sir." Kids who had never even seen Earth. Their only crime was being born human in council space. The silence in the command center was broken by the sound of Jiwoo's fist hitting the console. The metal dented under the impact. "Get me President Kong," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Get me the defense minister. Get me everyone." As emergency communications channels opened across Earth, one thing became crystal clear. The Galactic Council had just made the biggest mistake in their 1,000-year history. They had shown the galaxy exactly what they were capable of, and they had done it while the entire universe was watching. The age of peaceful diplomacy had just ended. The cargo bay of Kepler Station hummed with the sound of 1,000 different species going about their daily business. Merchants hawked exotic goods from distant worlds, while travelers waited for transport ships to carry them across the galaxy. But deep in the station's lower levels, where the lighting was dim and the air recyclers struggled to keep up, a different kind of meeting was taking place. Agent Choi Sun-ho stepped out of the shadows like a ghost. His stealth suit, a marvel of human engineering that most aliens didn't even know existed, shimmered as it deactivated. For 3 weeks, he had been moving through the galaxy's underworld, following a trail of breadcrumbs that led to one shocking conclusion. "You're late," whispered Station Master O. Yemen, his eyes darting nervously around the abandoned storage room. Yemen had been running intelligence operations for Earth for over a decade, all while pretending to be nothing more than a simple logistics coordinator. "Had to lose a council surveillance drone," Sun-ho replied, settling into the chair across from his contact. "They're watching everyone now, especially humans." Yamin slid a small crystal across the metal table. It looked ordinary enough, but Sun-ho knew it contained information that could change everything. "The records are all here. Every execution, every trial, every so-called crime they committed." Sun-ho inserted the crystal into his portable scanner. The data began flowing across the small screen, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Name after name, species after species, all marked with the same stamp: terminated for seditious activity. "Look at this," Sun-ho muttered, pointing to an entry. "Teacher Kim Yeon-soo from New Busan Colony. Crime: teaching alien children alongside human children. Sentence: death." He scrolled down. "Engineer Park Hainu from Terra Nova. Crime: reporting safety violations in council-approved mining operations. Sentence: death." The list went on and on. Doctors who had treated patients regardless of species. As artists who had created works celebrating unity between different races. Scientists who had shared their discoveries with everyone instead of keeping them for the council's benefit. "They killed them for having a conscience," Sun-ho said, his voice barely above a whisper. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Director Song Yuna stood in the center of the Global Intelligence Coordination Center. The massive room was filled with holographic displays showing every corner of the galaxy. For decades, while other species had dismissed humanity as primitive newcomers, Earth had been quietly building the most sophisticated intelligence network in galactic history. "Status report," Yuna called out, her voice carrying across the busy room. Agent Han Juno's face appeared on one of the screens. He was stationed near the Draconi worlds, deep in Council territory. "Ma'am, we're receiving encrypted communications from non-human species. They've lost people too. The Voltari sent us a list of 3,000 missing individuals. The Christic are reporting similar numbers." Another screen lit up with Agent Kim Soo-yang's face. She was positioned in the outer rim, where many of the galaxy's smaller species made their homes. "Director, even some of the minor council member species are reaching out. They're saying their own people have been disappearing for decades." Yuna felt a chill run down her spine. The picture emerging was far worse than anyone had imagined. The council hadn't just executed 50,000 beings in a single day. They had been systematically eliminating anyone who dared to question their authority for over 2 centuries. "How did we miss this?" asked Colonel Lee Dong-yuk, Earth's military intelligence chief. "Because they were careful," Yuna replied. "They took people from different worlds, different species, different time periods. No one saw the pattern until now." In the Earth Defense Force headquarters, Lieutenant Colonel Jimin was reviewing a flood of military reports ever since the broadcast. Human colonies across the galaxy had been sending urgent messages about increased Council military activity in their regions. "Ma'am," reported Major Kim Jisoo, "our deep space monitoring stations are detecting massive troop movements. Council fleets are positioning themselves around human colonies." Jimin pulled up a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red dots marked Council fleet positions, while blue dots showed human settlements. The pattern was clear and terrifying. "They're preparing for something big," she said. The execution wasn't just a demonstration of power. It was the opening move in a larger plan. But as Earth's military prepared for the worst, their intelligence satellites detected something unexpected. Deep in the asteroid belts between Mars and Jupiter, massive construction projects were visible. Shipyards that had been building in secret for years were now working around the clock. The President's Emergency Assembly was unlike anything in Earth's history. Representatives from every nation, every colony, every human settlement in the galaxy gathered in the vast chamber beneath Geneva. The air was thick with tension and barely controlled rage. President Kong Minyang stood at the central podium, her face grave. 50,000 innocent beings are dead. The Council believes this demonstration of power will cow us into submission. They are wrong. The chamber erupted in applause, but Kong raised her hand for silence. "Our intelligence networks have uncovered the truth. This wasn't an isolated incident. For over 200 years, the Council has been murdering anyone who dared to dream of a better galaxy." She activated a holographic display showing the data Sun Ho and countless other agents had gathered. Teachers, doctors, engineers, artists, scientists, people whose only crime was believing that all species deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Admiral Park Chan-woo stepped forward. "Madam President, our fleets are moving to defensive positions around human colonies. But I must inform you, we've detected something else." The display shifted to show the hidden shipyards. Massive vessels, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, were nearing completion. For 30 years, while the Council believed we were primitive and harmless, we've been preparing. Our ancestors came from a world where we had to fight for every inch of progress. Haven't forgotten those lessons. The chamber fell silent. As the implications sank in, humanity hadn't been sitting idle while the Council grew in power. They had been building, planning, waiting for the day when the galaxy's tyrants would go too far. That day had finally come. The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a sound like thunder. For over 1,000 years, these halls had echoed with the voices of the galaxy's most powerful beings. Ancient species that had ruled star systems before humanity even discovered fire now sat in towering chairs carved from crystallized starlight. But today, something was different. Today, the chamber fell completely silent. The central communicator, a device that could project signals across the entire galaxy, flickered to life. Ambassador Kim Do-yin's image appeared, larger than life, in the center of the chamber. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with a fire that made even the most arrogant council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Behind him stood two figures that made the alien counselors lean forward in their chairs. Admiral Yoon Si-han wore uniform of deep blue with silver trim, decorated with insignia that none of the Council's intelligence services had ever seen before. General Park Chen-ho stood beside him, his olive-green uniform bearing symbols that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. "Honorable Counselors," Do-yan began, his voice carrying across the vast chamber with perfect clarity. Every word was measured, every syllable carefully chosen. "We come before you today not as supplicants, but as the voice of justice itself." Counselor Lexmar, the same reptilian being who had overseen the execution, hissed softly. His yellow eyes narrowed. As he studied the human ambassador, "You dare to address this chamber without permission? We present evidence of crimes against galactic civilization," Do-yan continued, ignoring the interruption. With a gesture, he activated a holographic display that filled the entire chamber with images. The faces of the 50,000 executed beings appeared, rotating slowly in the air. But these weren't just names and numbers. These were people with stories, with families, with dreams that had been snuffed out forever. "Teacher Kim Yansu," Do-yan said, highlighting one face. She taught alien children to read human poetry. Her crime? Promoting cultural understanding between species? Another face appeared. Dr. Martinez Rodriguez. He developed vaccines that saved millions of lives across 12 different worlds. His crime? Sharing medical knowledge freely instead of selling it to the highest bidder. The display continued, showing victim after victim. Engineers who had built schools for alien children. Artists who had painted murals celebrating unity between species. Scientists who had shared their discoveries with everyone, regardless of race or homeworld. These beings died for one reason, Doyen said, his voice growing stronger. They believed in something the Council fears more than any weapon. The idea that all intelligent life deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The chamber erupted. In angry voices, counselors from dozens of species began shouting in languages that hadn't been heard in the same room for centuries. But above it all, one voice rose like the sound of an avalanche. Silence. Counselor Velthanus, the Ancient, leader of the hegemony, stood slowly from his throne. His species, the Eternals, had been old when the first stars were born. His stone-like skin was covered in symbols that predated most galactic languages, and his eyes glowed with the light of dying suns. Young species, he said, his voice carrying the weight of millennia, you forget your place in the natural order. We, who have ruled for 1,000 generations, will not bow to primitives who have barely learned to reach the stars. The other council members nodded in agreement. To them, humanity was just another upstart species that would learn its place through force, just like all the others. We demand the immediate surrender of those responsible for these atrocities, Da Yun continued, his voice never wavering. You have 72 hours to submit to trial for crimes against sapient life. The chamber fell silent again. Then, slowly, a sound began to build. It started as a chuckle from Counselor Thexmar, then grew into full laughter from Velthanus, till the entire chamber was filled with the mocking sounds of beings who had never known defeat. 72 hours, Doyan repeated, his image flickering. As he prepared to cut the transmission, use them wisely. The communication ended, leaving the council chamber in darkness. But across the galaxy, something extraordinary was happening. Ships began dropping out of hyperspace near every major council world. At first, the council's sensors detected only a few vessels, just as their intelligence reports had predicted. But then more appeared, and more. And more. Captain Lee Soyan stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Inchin's Pride, watching as the massive council military base at Zarian came into view. The base was a fortress in space, bristling with weapons that could destroy entire planets. But today, it looked small and vulnerable against the backdrop of stars. All stations, this is not a drill, she announced over the ship's communication system. The Admiral has given us our orders. Here to take position and await further instructions. The Inchin's Pride was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Where council ships were built for intimidation, sharp angles and threatening silhouettes, human vessels were designed for function. They moved with grace and precision there. Hulls gleaming with energy that pulsed like a heartbeat on the surface of Zarian base. Ow. General Crickstar of the Council Defense Force watched his sensor readings with growing alarm. Ow. He demanded of his intelligence. Chief, sir, our last report indicated they possess perhaps 50 vessels suitable for interstellar combat. The officer replied, his voice shaking. But we're detecting thousands of ships across council space. Crickstar's 4 arms began to tremble. His species, the Zephyrians, had conquered their home system through military might. But they had never faced anything like this. Where did they come from? The answer was becoming clear to commanders across the galaxy. For decades, while the Council had dismissed humanity as primitive and harmless, they had been building in secret. Hidden shipyards and asteroid belts, construction, facilities in the void between stars, manufacturing plants on worlds that didn't officially exist. Admiral Yoon Si-han's voice echoed across the human fleet. All units, maintain position. We are not here to conquer. We are here to serve justice. The 72-hour countdown had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The countdown timer on Admiral Yoon Si-han's command screen reached 0, and the galaxy held its breath. For 72 hours, the Council had refused to surrender, believing that their ancient power and superior technology would crush these upstart humans like insects. They were about to learn how wrong they were. All units, commence Operation Justice. Admiral Yoon spoke into his communicator. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with the memory of 50,000 innocent lives lost. The flagship, Seoul, was a marvel of human engineering. Unlike the massive, intimidating warships of the Council, it was sleek and efficient, designed for precision rather than brutality. Its hull gleamed with energy shields that pulsed like a living heartbeat, and its weapon systems were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The first target was the defensive satellite, its network around Zarian Base. These massive stations had protected Council worlds for centuries, their weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. But as the human ships approached, something extraordinary happened. Instead of the crude missile barrages the Council expected, beams of pure energy lanced out from the human vessels. The satellites didn't explode in fiery destruction. Instead, they simply stopped working. Their weapons went dark, their shields collapsed, and their communication systems went silent. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Kim Min-ho from the weapons station, "all defensive satellites are neutralized. 0 casualties detected." Admiral Yoon nodded grimly. "Target the military installations only. No civilian casualties. You're not here to become monsters like them." On the surface of Zarian Base, General Krickstar watched in horror as his impregnable fortress was systematically dismantled. His forearms trembled as he spoke into his emergency communicator. "All units, engage the human forces. Show them what happens when primitives challenge their betters." But the Council troops were about to discover that these primitives fought like nothing they had ever encountered. Colonel Nam Ju-ho led the first wave of human marines down from their transport ships. His soldiers moved through the base corridors. Like ghosts, their advanced armor making them nearly invisible to the Council's sensors. The aliens expected brutal frontal assaults. They found instead coordinated strikes that seemed to predict their every move. "Squad 3, take the left corridor," Ju-ho commanded through his helmet communicator. "Squad 5, circle around behind them. They're about to try a flanking maneuver through the ventilation shafts." A veteran warrior, with over 2 centuries of combat experience, watched his carefully laid ambush fall apart before it even began. "How?" he gasped, speaking to his aide. "They're reading our battle plans before we make them." The truth was simpler than the Council could imagine. While they had spent centuries becoming comfortable with their superiority, humanity had spent those same centuries learning to fight smarter, not harder. Every battle tactic in the Council's playbook had been studied, analyzed, and countered by human strategists who understood that survival meant adapting to any threat. High above the planet, Major Jung Yoon-ji's fighter squadron was putting on a display that would be remembered for generations. Her ships moved through the orbital defenses like dancers, weaving between enemy fire with an elegance that defied all conventional space combat doctrine. "Phoenix leader to all units," she called out over the radio, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Remember, we're not here to show off. Disable their weapons, then move to the next target." The Council's starfighters, piloted by species with centuries of experience, found themselves completely outmatched. Their massive, heavily armored vessels were designed for intimidation, but against human fighters that moved like living things, they were sitting ducks. "How are they doing that?" demanded Squadron Leader Velkoth, his ship spinning helplessly after a perfectly placed shot disabled his engines. "They're moving in 3 dimensions like they were born in space." The answer was that humans had learned to fight in 3 dimensions because they had to. Earth's children had grown up in 0 gravity on space stations, learned to think in directions that planet-bound species couldn't even imagine. Meanwhile, on the surface of Nexus Prime, the Council's capital world, Captain Kwon Min-yuk's special forces team was moving through the government complex with surgical precision. Their mission was the most important of all: capture the Council leadership alive. "Sir," reported Sergeant Lim Gaeong, her voice crackling through the secure communication. "Channel We have visual on the primary targets. Counselor Thexmar and his inner circle are attempting to escape via the underground transport system. Through her helmet's enhanced vision, she could see the reptilian council leader and his guards rushing through the tunnels beneath the capital. Building, they thought they were safe, hidden in passages that had been secret for centuries. Executive Minyuk responded, his voice cold as space itself. Cut off their escape route. We take them alive. No exceptions. The Special Forces team moved like shadows through the complex. Their armor was covered in adaptive camouflage that made them blend into any environment. And their weapons were designed to capture, not kill. Every shot was precisely calculated to disable rather than destroy. As Thexmar reached the underground transport platform, he'd found his way blocked by a figure in black armor. Captain Minyuk stood alone, his weapon lowered but ready. Going somewhere. Counselor, Minyuk asked, his voice amplified by his helmet speakers. The alien leader's yellow eyes blazed with fury. You think you can judge us? We who have ruled the galaxy since before your species learned to make fire? I think Minyuk replied calmly that 50,000 innocent beings would disagree with you if they were still alive to speak.
Across
the galaxy, the same scene was playing out on dozens of worlds. Council fleets that had terrorized star systems for centuries found themselves outgunned, outmaneuvered, and completely outclassed by human forces that seemed to appear from nowhere. The species that had been dismissed as primitive had quietly become the most formidable military force in galactic history. But more than that, they had done something unprecedented. They had waged war with both devastating efficiency and absolute moral restraint. Not a single civilian had been harmed. Not one innocent life had been lost. The humans had proven that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to know when to show mercy. The galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the fall of the Council, the Great Chamber on Nexus Prime looked completely different. Gone were the towering thrones and intimidating symbols of power. In their place stood a simple courtroom, wooden benches and clear glass walls that let in natural sunlight for the first time in centuries. Chief Justice Yumin stood at the central podium, her black robes a stark contrast to the bright, hopeful atmosphere of the new chamber. Behind her, holographic displays showed the faces of the 50,000 victims, their images serving as a constant reminder of why they were all here. The defendants stand accused of systematic murder, suppression of sapient rights, and crimes against galactic civilization, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom and broadcasting. Lived to billions of beings across the galaxy. In the defendants section, the former council members sat in simple chairs, no longer the gods they had pretended to be. Counselor Thexmar, once the most feared being in the galaxy, now looked small and ordinary without his elaborate robes and ceremonial weapons. His yellow eyes, which had once blazed with arrogance, now darted nervously around the room. Beside him sat Counselor Velthanus, the ancient eternal whose stone-like skin was now dull and gray. For the first time in millennia, he looked his age. The other council members, representing species from across the galaxy, all shared the same expression of disbelief. They had ruled for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to be. Judged by others, the evidence presented over the past weeks had been overwhelming. Agent Choi Sun-ho and his team had done their work well. Recordings of secret meetings where the council had planned the executions. Documents showing how they had systematically targeted anyone who dared to speak out against their rule. Financial records proving they had stolen resources from countless worlds to fund their lavish lifestyle. But perhaps most damning of all were the testimonies from survivors. Beings from dozens of species who had lost family members, friends, and loved ones to the Council's reign of terror. In the gallery, Captain Park Min-gi watched as an elderly Veltari woman took the stand. Her blue skin was wrinkled with age, and her voice shook as she spoke about her daughter, a teacher who had been executed for the crime of teaching alien children to read. My Vela was a good person, the woman said, tears streaming down her face. She believed that knowledge belonged to everyone, not just the powerful. For that belief she died. Next to Captain Minji sat Ambassador Crixtel of the Christic Republic. His insect-like species had been among the first to secretly contact Earth after the broadcast. sharing their own stories of loved ones who had disappeared over the centuries. "We thought we were alone," he whispered to Minji. "We thought no one would ever stand up to them." The trial had lasted 3 months, with witnesses from every corner of the galaxy. The evidence was so overwhelming that even the Council's own defense attorneys had struggled to find anything to say in their client's favor. Finally, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. "Chief Justice, you stood once again," her voice carrying the weight of history. "The court finds the defendants guilty on all charges," she announced. The courtroom erupted in cheers, but she raised her hand for silence. "However, in recognition of the new galactic order we seek to build, they will be sentenced to life imprisonment rather than execution. Justice, not vengeance, must guide us forward." Some in the gallery looked disappointed. They had wanted to see the council members suffer as their victims had suffered. But as the implications of the sentence sank in, a different feeling began to spread through the crowd. This wasn't just about punishment. This was about proving that the new galaxy would be better than the old one. President Kang Min-young took the stage as the trial concluded. Behind her stood representatives from over 300 species, all united in their commitment to a better future. "Today, we establish a new galactic charter," she announced, her voice carrying hope that had been missing from the galaxy for centuries. One based on equality, accountability, and the protection of all sapient life. No species shall dominate another. No government shall silence the voices of conscience. The new charter was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of rule by the strongest, it established a true democracy where every species, no matter how small or newly discovered, had an equal voice. Instead of secret tribunals and midnight executions, it guaranteed due process and the right to a fair trial for all beings. Admiral Yoon Sahan oversaw the massive task of decommissioning the Council's war fleets. The giant dreadnoughts that had once terrorized innocent worlds were being converted into hospital ships and refugee transports. Their weapons were being redistributed to member worlds for defense rather than oppression. "It's amazing," reported Captain Lee Soyan as she watched a former Council battleship being fitted with medical equipment. "These ships that once brought death are now going to save lives." Dr. Yu Hanna worked tirelessly to establish the Memorial Archive, a vast digital library that would preserve the names and stories of every being who had died under Council rule. The 50,000 who had been executed in the broadcast were just the beginning. Her team had identified over 2 million victims across the centuries. "We will not let them be forgotten," she promised, working late into the night to input another set of records. "Every name, every story, every life that was lost will be remembered." As the last Council stronghold on the remote world of Zarian finally surrendered, humanity revealed the true scope of their preparation. For decades, while the galaxy had seen them as primitive newcomers, they had been building something unprecedented: a network of allies, intelligence operatives, and hidden military assets that spanned the entire galaxy. The secret shipyards in the asteroid belts had been producing vessels for 30 years. The intelligence networks had been gathering information for even longer. Most importantly, they had been building relationships with oppressed species across the galaxy, creating a web of trust and cooperation that the Council had never suspected existed. "We didn't win this war through superior firepower," explained General Park Chan-ho to a gathering of military leaders from across the galaxy. "We won it because we understood something the Council never learned. True strength comes from working together, not from ruling over others." The memorial wall on Nexus Prime was completed 1 year after the trial. It stretched 4 kilometers, bearing the names of every being who had died under Council rule. At its center stood a simple inscription in memory of those who dared to dream of a better galaxy. As beings from across the galaxy came to pay their respects, they carried with them the promise that such atrocities would never happen again. The age of tyranny was over. The age of justice had begun. The galaxy had learned a fundamental truth: never underestimate a species that values justice over power. Never threaten the innocent when humans are watching. The end.